Alrighty, what is going on, everyone? So, welcome to the David Wells Experiment. I'm your host, David Wells, and this is going to be a lighter episode than the last one, hence the upbeat, bright, positive music I used for the intro. So, anyway, so in comparison to the subject matter, yeah, going to be lighter. So, the first thing I'm going to address is Marvel movies being cinema. I know a couple years ago, there was this big thing about like, is it really cinema? And people are like, well, what is cinema? And I'm going to throw my 2 cents in on the matter. So, a couple years ago, Martin Scorsese said that Marvel, okay, the impression was given through the grapevine that Martin Scorsese said that Marvel movies aren't cinema. Now, he clarified in a Variety director's interview that he never said Marvel movies. He said superhero movies. They weren't cinema. And so I did some digging and I found out that he basically said that superhero movies, that, they can have great actors, great writers. In a very technical sense, they've got all the right elements they need, but there just isn't that sort of emotional human connection. He did make some comparison to roller coasters and amusement parks, but the point he was getting at, this is what I believe he was trying to get to, is that the spectacle aspect of it, it can cause to be a disconnect between feeling a genuine human emotion. And he did go on to say that it is a matter of his personal preference. So I'm like, okay, I can respect that. Different strokes for different folks, as Prince once said. Now, Francis Ford Coppola, he chimed in around that time and he said something to the effect of like, Marty's just being too polite. Really, those movies, they're disgusting. And he goes on to talk about how all the theater chains want to promote these big budget special effects extravaganzas and they don't want to invest in the smaller art house movies or the ones that are about human interaction. So a lot of people were like, there were some people who, like me, they healthily disagree. Then, of course, there are the people like, rah, 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 get your knives and pitchforks. Now, a couple moments later, I hear not Martin Scorsese, I hear Francis Ford Coppola. He says that Deadpool was one of the few superhero movies that he did like. And he said it was because it was original, it had a different take on like that sort of material. And so I sort of get where he's coming from. Now, I don't agree that just because a movie has special effects, that therefore, like, it has no connection to human drama. So, let's look at it this way. Let's look at superhero movies, the movies that Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola take issue with, and then human dramas, the ones that they propose they want to see more of that stuff. So a long time ago, just by sheer virtue of like economics, the sort of human dramas were more of what Hollywood was producing because one, they were less expensive, and two, the special effects weren't there to do more crazy stuff. And you could make an argument about the expense because the mid-budget movies, the sort of 20 to 80 million human dramas, like say something like Man on the Moon, that Jim Carrey movie about Andy Kaufman, and A Beautiful Mind, the one where Russell Crowe plays a math genius who's got like mental issues. Those got sizable budgets. They might not get those in this day and age. And I think that's one of the reasons why when Martin Scorsese made The Irishman, they gave him a generous budget for the kind of movie that he was making. So just by virtue of economics, um, people couldn't make superhero movies the way that they do now. And it was seen as a, I think one thing is like today we can make big budget superhero movies or big spectacle movies, and enough are made that if there's a loss, there's a loss, and we can try again. But, I think the gradual ascension of superhero movies has been that gradual. There was a lot of experimentation to see what works and what doesn't, and even now, people don't always win. Like, there is one group that consistently makes superhero movies good, and that is Kevin Feige and the MCU. Like, there are tons of superhero movies, like the DC, um, Marvel, and by Marvel, properties that weren't owned by Marvel exactly, but maybe they were licensed out. So, and they all had varying levels of success, and not every superhero property becomes successful. I think Netflix, jumped on the bandwagon of dark, gritty, realistic superhero show. It was something Jupiter or whatever, and that lasted one season. I've heard some people say it's a pretty good show, but it wasn't pulling the numbers that Netflix liked. So for a long time, human dramas were the only option, but superheroes, they got better. And through enough trial and error, Kevin Feige kind of realized a formula of how to do things. And I would counter Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola saying that they're just relying on a formula, because when the MCU started, and I do have to take into account that they did not target the MCU specifically, but when the MCU started, they didn't have access to all the best characters, or well, the more well-known characters that everybody could get off the top of their heads. They didn't have access to the X-Men, to Spider-Man. Um, so they had to work with what some believed were second-tier characters. But here's the thing, they made them interesting enough that maybe people were drawn in by the cool stuff, the fighting, the special effects, and they stayed for the characters. I mean, why do we love Iron Man? He's this snarky, sarcastic, brilliant billionaire inventor, and he's funny. But at the same time, he carries this weight of responsibility, and we're intrigued by that. And I don't know. Anyway, also, one of the things about Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, these sort of old school auteurs, is that they benefit a lot from the advances that these movies make, the superhero movies, because some of the most groundbreaking special effects I've seen have taken place in the MCU. I remember when I saw Robert Downey Jr. de-aged in Civil War, I was astounded. Like now, I'm kind of numb to it, but I remember like, oh my gosh, they did that. And one effect, which I found out was invisible, was in Civil War, Black Panther's outfit, for whatever reason, it didn't look the way the directors needed it to. It lacked something. I forget what they said, but anyway, they went in and they digitally augmented it or enhanced it or replaced it. It was something that I hadn't noticed, and even when they told me what they did, I didn't notice it. It just blended perfectly with everything that was practical. And I think the big kicker for me was in Captain Marvel when we see Samuel Jackson de-aged. I thought I was going to be astounded by those special effects, but I'm like, oh, it's Samuel Jackson. It's in the 90s. Like, it so didn't stand out to me I'm trying to figure out how to best word this. It was so astounding but so unremarkable at the same time. I think the remarkability in it was that it just looked so normal that I wasn't even engaged like, oh, he looks so young. So that was an accomplishment. And in, Avengers Endgame, I didn't know that when they had those outfits on, the time traveling ones, that they hadn't come up with them and they had to add those in digitally. I just thought they were wearing cool outfits. So, and it's like whenever they make these advancements, it makes the process easier for people like the smaller budgeted films, like what Martin Scorsese and what Francis Ford Coppola are working with. And in fact, spectacle films, you could argue that, this was kicked off by George Lucas because when he was making movies, he figured out how can I make this process easier? And he invented a lot of the or I'm speaking in broad terms, but he laid the groundwork for all the special effects that would make these special effects movies and that both Martin and Francis Ford Coppola would benefit from. So, yeah. Anyway, also one thing and in one issue, sorry guys, at one point where I take issue with Martin Scorsese talking about the spectacle taking away from the human drama. I remember he made that movie Hugo, which takes place in the early days of cinema, and he shows a character having an emotional response to that movie where they get into a rocket ship and go to the moon, and like the moon has a face. That's so a spectacle. And but the thing is, it does add something to the human experience. And he talks about, Italian neorealism and all that. So much of the camera work and everything you see used in a way where it is spectacle. So I don't think that spectacle necessarily takes away from human drama. I mean, look at Baz Luhrmann. He is all about making things as extra as possible, and that enhances what they've got. Really, I think the issue with certain filmmakers is because Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola aren't the only ones. Others have taken issue with the genre and its success. What I really think is there's no sort of Kevin Feige of these sorts of movies, no sort of orchestrator. There isn't like an MCU equivalent of the kind of movies that they're talking about wanting to see more of. Now I say that, but I kind of realize, well, there sort of is. Quentin Tarantino makes movies which are about people and are about their interactions and how they handle it, and he draws in crowds. And Christopher Nolan, who he got to where he is because of superhero movies, but he also knew how to tell stories. I mean, he gets taken to task for Tenet and releasing it during the pandemic, but at a time when everybody was too scared to go to the movie theaters, Tenet drew in 300 million. That's a far cry from what they were hoping it to make. But he knew in order to make an interesting movie, you just had to make an interesting movie. I really think it kind of in a way feels like film students who are just bemoaning the fact that, oh, nobody gets me. They don't get my vision or what I'm trying to do. And people are free to do that, but people are also free to want to not go see a movie. Like for me personally, I don't like any of those scary movies or the parody movies. They're trash to me. So I just don't go see them. But I will call them, even those, I will call cinema. Maybe not great cinema, but they're still cinema because they elicit an emotional response from me even if it is a negative one. So what I think is they just got to make better movies. Now, to his credit, Francis Ford Coppola has thought the next movie I might make is going to be this $100 million project. I might have to just bankroll it myself because I don't think any studio would. So kudos to him on that. But also, and maybe he's doing this and I just didn't hear about it, if he wants different kinds of movies to come about, why doesn't he bankroll them? Why doesn't he fund them and advocate for them? It feels like him, of all people, is in a position where he could patronize and build up the sort of thing that he loves rather than saying, like, oh, it's all the fault of these movies. I don't think it's the fault of spectacle movies. I think it is the fault of. I think that certain groups within a certain genre did something right and they know what parameters to stick in because that's the audience, because they know their audience and they know what they want. Quentin Tarantino, he has an audience, he knows what they want. Adam Sandler, he's got an audience, he knows what they want, and he also knows that he's capable of doing other things like Uncut Gems. That movie was great. Anyway, I don't know how to say it other than like don't half-ass things. You know, make your art and have your artistic vision, but some people might not want to see your movie. I feel like I'm going on a bit of a rant this time, but it is just so interesting to hear people who are so avant-garde and so new, so bold and fresh back in the day kind of become the establishment, kind of become the old men complaining about back in my day. I will say this, between Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, I really do respect Martin Scorsese more because he's still putting out movies that rock with the same kind of energy they had in his youth. Like the flame hasn't died out yet. He's made different movies, but I don't know, the last movie I saw or that I didn't have enough time to, but I looked at trailers for Francis Ford Coppola movies from a certain point, and I really do feel they began to dip after, like, say, the 90s. I think the last movie he actually did was in 2011 with Val Kilmer. It didn't look great, so it's like, maybe there is a reason people aren't flocking to see your movies anymore. And who knows, maybe he just doesn't want to make movies. But there's that age-old adage which, you could take to task as you could with anything. If you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So, I don't know, find some dude. My advice to them would be find some dudes who you believe in and who you think they've got what it takes to make movies and build those guys up. Because it's really easy to criticize. It's really difficult to make something, but I think that's a lesson you guys should have learned by now. And I'm really more calling out Francis Ford Coppola specifically, and not even calling out, but bringing attention to something which I would presume that he knows already. Well, anyway, that's going to be this episode of the David Wells Experiment. Hope you all have an absolutely super day, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye.